You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of ZESTY Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hi there, party people. Alex here. So glad that you're joining me today. We're going to talk about difficult emotions today, and we're going to talk about 3 steps to moving through them. It's a process that I follow every single time. This has been super life-changing for me, and then when we teach it inside our Health Transformation Accelerator and the one-on-one clients that I have, and between Megan and I, this has been huge, and I even teach this to family members. So I'm that passionate about this process. It's been a game changer for me. So before I dig into that, I just wanted to announce that we have our 4-day Getting Your Brain on Board with Your Habits challenge. That is coming up, so keep an eye out on your inbox. We're going to put the link down below in the show notes for you to join us. It is a 4-day live challenge where Megan and I will be hanging out with you for 90 minutes every single day of the challenge. And yes, there will be replays if you can't come live, but the whole goal is to take what is kind of the hang up in your life, what's going on there, and then completely unpackaging it and repackaging it in the brain-based format, right? So if you are someone that's listening along and you're like, I know what I should do, I know where I'm going, and I seem to just either not get there, I keep falling off the wagon, I feel bad about what I do every day because it's not in line with what I say I want, or I do the things but I'm not getting the result that I want, that challenge is going to be for you. And for the participants in the challenge, you could win $1,000, not up to $1,000, and it is not attached to anything. It's just $1,000 to do whatever you want with. Right? So that's some brain-based motivation for you to come join us. So check out the link below for signing up for the challenge. That's going to be February 21st through the 24th. So you have a little bit of time to sign up, and you will have a chance to get a bonus entry when you bring a friend to the challenge and to do it, with someone in your life. So bring a friend, and that gets you a bonus entry into the challenge. All right, so let's talk difficult emotions. The 3 steps that we're going to talk about, I'm going to sort of set them up, but it is based on processing emotions. Okay, so if you are listening along because you're like, I don't want to have the difficult emotions, this process does not get you out of feeling emotions. What it does do, though, is it gets the emotion moved through and released so that it doesn't stay held inside your body, inside your, energetic field, and kind of wreaking havoc on under the surface, because that's what happens with unresolved emotions that we sweep under the rug. And I totally get it because I did that for years. I never learned how to share my emotions, acknowledge them to myself, and move through them, right? I grew up in the time period and in the location where it really was a lot more like, hey, you're a kid, you're supposed to survive, you do your thing and, behave, and it's all good. So really, if you're in that category, I don't blame you. I think that we all at this point understand that's not something anyone taught us. And so there can be a lot of fear around negative emotions, and that's something that we're going to talk about. But long story short, this does not sidestep emotions because, in my understanding, and this is brain based, when we don't allow ourselves to release that and discharge that energy, it gets stored. Right? It's not that we can fool our system, our brains, our emotional bodies into thinking that something's gone when it isn't, right? And so the whole goal here is to begin to release and process all of those layers so that when things come up, it doesn't feel like, when it used to be when I would get hit with something like rejection, it'd be like every layer of rejection would start to reverberate. Whereas once I started to process and address and release and move through these emotions, then even when the events come up, it's not that I don't, feel what I feel, and it doesn't actually hit the same, because that's why the work is worth doing, right? That's the benefit of it. There's actually a lot of other benefits that we could talk about, but that's not the point of this episode. So that's number one. The other thing to talk about before we get to the three steps is the goal of this. So, in line with processing emotions, not sidestepping them, is understanding the emotional scale that goes from really heavy, negative, challenging emotions like shame, grief, despair, then more to the neutral, right? Contentment, peace, that kind of thing. And then moving up through the, actually, I shouldn't say peace in that, but, contentment, or even mild frustration, right? Those are more of the neutral categories. And then moving up to the, what we describe as strong positive emotions, joy, love, those kind of things. So, most of us, when we talk about resolving emotions, because we have not been trained in our emotional bodies, what most of us want, and I can say this from experience, is when I'm having a negative emotion, it feels bad, I want to go to a positive one, right? And that's super reasonable. Why wouldn't you want that? That sounds great. And I think that the reason we get hung up on that, and the reason I point out that we haven't been taught that, because I think it's the same as for the physical body being like, I haven't run in years, I'm going to go run a half marathon. There, we don't have the agility, the training, the that kind of stuff to really understand. So when when there are people like, very highly spiritual people have spent a lifetime doing this, or a period of time, they become very adept. Sometimes that can happen. I'm not denying the fact that you can go from negative to positive internally. I'm not saying you're sad and then something great happens and you go, right? This is the actual internal experience of moving yourself up the emotional scale. With a lot of refinement, with a lot of practice, I do believe that it's possible for us to have the emotional understanding and the refinement to do that kind of thing. And most of us are not going to wake up on any given day and know how to do that, right now. Therefore, I think the goal of this is moving through neutral. And this is something we talk about in our Health Transformation Accelerator a lot as we go through processes in the weeks as we unfold all of this systematically. And we'll talk about it in the challenge too. But to go from a difficult or challenging, what we perceive or interpret as a negative emotion, to neutrality is often a much more realistic and powerful place to be, right? Because if we try to go from I'm super depressed to, oh, but I don't want to create that in my life, I'm going to go to happy, but we don't get to happy because it's too big of a jump, then we feel bad. Then we worry, oh no, what if, I have to feel guilty about the fact that I am stewing in my negativity, right? Whereas when we say, I'm going to go to neutral, that's just, more of a steadier state. Then from neutral, a lot of times we can find that we have the capacity in the moment to edge more towards a new thing. And sometimes once you're in neutrality, then the jump to positivity becomes available in a way that hadn't been available when you didn't have the intermediate spot, right? And it's the same things happening here, as I kind of think of it as a storm or something like that, where the waves are really unstable, right? There's a storm, there's lots of movement. That what that means is that often there's not a lot of clarity. As we set a more reasonable goal, I'm going to get to neutral, which can even be like I'm still mildly frustrated about this. As we go from that, or rather from something like anger or despair to mild frustration, it calms the waves. Now, from those calmer waves, we can start to see the shorelines available to us. So sometimes from neutral, it gets us to positive. So we're still going negative to positive. Sometimes neutral is the best that we can do that day. And because that's the goal that we're setting, when we hit around neutral, it's like, yay, I can say I'm at my goal, right? And then that way we're not even really placing such a heavy weighted expectation. It's not that it's bad to expect to feel good, but when we place that needlessly and then fail to meet it and then beat ourselves up, you can start to hear, oh, there's so many steps in that are not necessary, right? And so here we're going to acknowledge that the goal is neutrality, and only from there can we decide what else is available for us, and from there we can, if available, move in a positive direction. But that is the explanation of why I talk about these steps in the way that I do and why they are what they are, because that's essentially, I think, a lot of the steps that we're missing of just let it go, just surrender, just think positive, right? Like that all ends up being the toxic positivity that doesn't get us the results that we want. That is being like, it's easier for me to pretend like everything's good, oh, until, I fall off the wagon again and then get into beating myself up, and then I'll deal with it then. But really, in the grand scheme of things, why even set up our life like that, right? And that's why I talk about a lot of these topics, because there's a lot of stuff out there that can make us feel like that's the expectation. And while the goal and the concept I agree with, I think that the vast majority of us need tools to get there. All right, so what are the 3 steps? Step number 1 is acknowledging and feeling the emotion. Many of us kind of tiptoe around this step, and we end up a little bit lying to ourselves. I said this with a lot of love because I've I've been here and I did it for so long. That's why I can see it as a step, right? Because a lot of times we're like, yeah, I know, I feel bad. But really, what also feels bad, if you actually stop and acknowledge it and start to sit with it and look at it, what ends up happening is that there's actually multiple layers, right? So you have the negative emotion. Then a lot of times there's fear about the fact that you have the negative emotion, or anger that you're having it, right? And then you have probably noticed this, when that stuff comes up, a lot of times we haven't sat with it enough to be like, to be dexterous with our emotions like this, where it all comes up as one bundle, then where we're experiencing an emotion, pushing it away by judging it. So kind of rejecting and denying that part of ourselves that's having it. It comes up as a whole ball, and then you feel on top of that the discomfort of like, oh, what can I do to get out of this, right? It's like, oh, let me call a friend, oh, let me get up, oh, let me look at my phone and zone out, oh, let me complain, let me go into victim mode. Like whatever it is, you feel that discomfort and it drives. It's like a little motor that says, go do things, go figure it out, you know go do that. So all that stuff is not acknowledging the emotion. There's just the emotion that is actually happening. And we can acknowledge the emotions that come in sync with that. Like, for example, I used to really associate feeling negative emotions with miscreating, because that's what I had learned. Is basically, you're like, if you don't focus on what you want and where you're going, then you're not creating the life that you want. And while I absolutely think that there's truth in that, I think those concepts, it's the same thing there, where if we're just like, we'll just be happy all the time, eh, I didn't see that pan out, right? And most of us have realized that that's, bypassing. So this takes a little bit of getting to know yourself, of being like, how do I acknowledge what the emotion is, and then also see what's coming up around it. Is it worry that I'm doing something wrong? Is it guilt because I think that I shouldn't feel that way, or I've already dealt with this, right? But you won't ever know how to unpackage that until you actually name and look at what all that stuff is, right? And most of the time in that moment, you're going to have the emotion, and anything that comes up with it, because it happens in life routinely, you just have a lot of time to practice this, right? So you may not nail it and, like, fully understand and be able to really even know what acknowledging your emotions look like for you personally. I could tell you, but it's kind of like me telling you how to swim. When you have that, you begin to get more accuracy with that. The goal for step number one ultimately is to give yourself the time and space to ask these questions of, what am I really feeling, without necessarily jumping to what you're going to do about it. So that's number one. And so it's simple, but that doesn't mean that the experience of learning to do that will be simple at every single turn. And I think that's an important thing to recognize too, right? If I'm just like, oh, it's super easy, just acknowledge your emotions, and then you go and have a hard time doing that, then I haven't really been much service to you, right? I'm basically adding to the fact that there's probably a lot of guilt and shame to begin with. So it's practice, and you get better when you give yourself the time to acknowledge it, and because it begins to give you the focus to say, instead of reaching for food or alcohol or calling a friend or whatever that I'm going to do, or even positive stuff, right? Journaling or whatever. We're going to talk about that as step two, but without step number one of acknowledging, even the good stuff that we pick may not adequately address, right? If we're just doing things to sort of be like, I want to get out of this, I want to sidestep this, it's not, it doesn't work like that. It's like it's like your own thoughts. Like, you hear all of the thoughts you think, right? And it's the same thing there with emotions. If they're there, they're there. That's kind of how it goes. And so take a beat first to acknowledge what's going on. Naming it is really good. If you can't name it, I kind of add, where is it in my body? Is it moving? Is it static? Am I having pictures associated with it? Is it memories? That kind of stuff can all help unfold what's going on underneath the surface. Number two is where the processing happens of the emotions. Now, processing emotions, there are many different ways to do this. And I've talked about some on the podcast already. But processing emotions is really any activity that allows you to experience the rise, moving through, and the fall of the emotion. Now, I like to think of it in terms of the bodies, right? So for emotions in the physical body, this is where parasympathetic activities can help the body feel safe to process and release these emotions. So putting yourself in that state. But I also really love things like the chest thump, tapping, like emotional freedom technique, and even just thumping on the body, like wherever. That's why it's important to ask where I'm feeling it, because if you are feeling it in different locations or it's moving, I actually kind of take a lightly closed fist and I just kind of tap on my body. You're not beating yourself up, but helping discharge and move the emotional energy through the physical body can help move that out. Shaking, so the kind of the same reason that when birds get into a fight they shake their feathers afterwards, or uh, like dogs or cats, that something happens that's stressful and they kind of shake after. That's a similar thing that the human body will do as well. So all of those are physical body things. Emotional body things, this is where things that allow you to feel into it. This is where crying can be really cathartic if that's what you feel like. If you want to hug, if you want to express the emotions through journaling, talking to a friend, talking to into a voice recorder, that kind of thing can all really help. Mentally, I think those two go together, because when we journal or express ourselves, we are sharing the thoughts and feeling the emotions that are brought up by expressing the thoughts. So that is where they're working really in tandem. And I've done the energetic shower here on the podcast, and the standing in the eye of the hurricane. Those are all tools that are available for you as well. And energetic body is in with the white light shower. So lots of different options for processing. It can be putting on music that gets you to feel into it. It can be doing art, or it can be coloring. These are all just different ideas. You don't have to get stuck on what other people perceive as emotional processing. If it works for you, it works for you. So if the primal scream and screaming into a pillow is your preferred way, you want to go have a great little pillow that you have just for that, go ahead and do that. There's literally no one that can tell you how to process your emotions. So just do what works. But I would say if you are relatively new to this, and especially if you didn't grow up with this kind of stuff, I would say experiment, because sometimes we really feel like, oh, journaling, everyone talks about it, I should do it, I'll get journal prompts. But if you find yourself falling off the bandwagon with that, first of all, come to the habit challenge. And second of all, it may just not be a great fit for you. I have some one on one clients that I work with where, when we talk about journaling, and that's not a great fit for them, we don't say like, oh, how do we reframe journaling so that you like it? We're just like, okay, well, let's go on to the other million and 10 choices that we have for that kind of stuff. So don't force yourself to make a thing fit for you if it doesn't. And it's worth experimenting, just because things do change. Megan and I used to hate journaling, and now we love it. And so it's one of those where it's worth doing both. And at the same time, it is really important. If you hate journaling and you're trying to process emotions through journaling, don't pick that one to start with, right? Like, don't force yourself to do something that you don't feel good doing to get better at feeling. There's lots of stuff like this out there. Don't do it. It's like having the perfect diet for health. You can have the perfect diet, but if it's making you freaking miserable to live that way and do it and do the cleanup and the cooking, it's not it's not fully working. It's the same thing here. So experiment, leave an open mind, and honor yourself. That's the whole point of this. Okay, so that's step number 2. And then step number 3 is neutrality. Now, sometimes neutrality will be a natural extension of the emotions being released. However, if that's not the case, so if it is, acknowledge that. Hey, this is what I said. This is where I am. I did it. I'm going to celebrate myself. This is really great. I'm putting, in my self trust, my self worth piggy bank, that when I say I'm going to show up for myself and be there for my own emotions, I do that. So celebrate that. If not, this is where once you've done the emotional processing things, right, the actual activities, the going into it, you will find that sometimes the time has come where you find yourself in a loop or things are have gotten a little stuck. This is where moving to a neutral activity is one of the best things we can do, because even in the self-development community, it's awesome that we're taking more responsibility and standing in our own empowerment. That's all great. It's awesome. But sometimes we trade in the struggle for the healing struggle, right? And we're like, oh, I still feel bad. That means I should do more work and fix myself and all this stuff. Once you have given yourself the space and the time to process your emotions in terms of moving them and experiencing them and acknowledging them and, talking through them or whatever it is that you choose to do, physical body, right? Journaling, whatever it is, at some point, if you're feeling stuck, this is where step 3 comes in. And it's like you're going to go to a completely neutral activity. This is not working on yourself. This is not healing yourself. Looks like Megan and I, so in Health Transformation Accelerator, we when we have our weeks on these topics, we actually have curated like funny videos that are our neutrality files that Megan and I have put together over years. These are dancing dogs and cute animal friendships and like really touching moments, captured, just like humans doing stuff and someone will catch it on tape and being sweet to each other. Or watching Netflix. Megan and I love watching The Office, or I'll put on Friends reruns. Even if it's scrolling on social media, no, I will let you make the call in terms of sometimes we're not in the emotional headspace for that. So if you know that about yourself, that's not a great option. But that not doesn't necessarily mean social media is off the table for 100% of people. For example, my Facebook, I've talked about this before. I have really, really worked on curating my feed. So my feed is all super motivational, inspiring, fun, lighthearted, like jokes, cuteness, love. Like, that's my safe place to be. And so if I'm going to choose that, I already know that that's the space that I have that I've created for myself, right? So it's not that, social media is all good, all bad, just like anything else. You have to understand what it's doing for you. And so while zoning out can be great, you just want to be conscientious of what you have going on around that. This can be like walking the dogs, calling a friend, not talking about the emotion, not talking about the problem. All of these neutrality things are just helping you calm the storm. Now, that is much, much easier when you've done the first 2 steps because you're not denying it. Like, what happens when you have a symptom and you ignore it? It gets louder until the disease process unfolds and then you have more symptoms. It's the same thing here. So, step number 1, acknowledging it, you are saying, hey, I see you, and then you're addressing it. When it comes to getting into neutral, it's a vastly different experience then. So, if you had tried to, and you've probably done this, right? So, you already know you have the strong negative emotion, then you just try to zone out about it. It feels about the same as bypassing. So, this is not the same as doing that. It needs the first 2 steps to make the third one make sense and give it the actual like neutrality and distraction and moving your attention and focusing on not the problem and things like that. It works, but it's best paired when we actually are brave enough to do the lead up to that, and then in that it really does help move us through and we're not denying ourselves, we're not self-sabotaging and all of that. So those are the 3 steps. Once you get through there, this is where you will know what you are available for. Sometimes on the really, really crappy days, there is no way I'm going to try to be like, I'm happy today. Because is just not authentic to what I'm experiencing. And more than anything, I want to validate and authenticate my experience of life. Not everyone else is going to agree. And the only way I can ensure my own safety in my experience is if I don't gaslight myself, if I don't deny what I need. This is really, really key to moving through life in a way that feels good to you. It takes the pressure off all the other people and the circumstances. Not fully, of course, we're humans, but that's generally what it tends to do. Right. So then as you've done that, you you can see, is there positivity, right? And if the opportunity for positivity is available to you and you feel that, this is where I like to pull out my list of, I have my affirmations, I have kind of my vision boards, I have the things that remind me of where I'm going, and I anchor back to there. Usually by then, I know that I'm available to it, and it's a good check. Once I'm looking at that stuff or I'm saying the affirmations, there's a lot of resistance. I just stop and go back to the neutral. Otherwise, you kind of, I feel myself getting excited about this stuff. I'm looking forward. That's really how I know that it's available to me in that moment. And there are times where all you can really do is acknowledge that that's all you got for today, and that the goal is then to maintain neutrality for as much as it makes sense to or it feels authentic to you. But if you have another dip, you just go back to step number one. Because here's the thing with processing emotions that we're going to wrap up with, but it's crucial to keep in mind. When we work through layers of emotions, because they've been stored, most of us, when you begin this, you realize how much has been swept under the rug. As you go, each layer that gets released, even when the next layer comes up and you feel that, it still feels like that emotion, right? It feels similarly. But what changes, the reframe and the understanding that is super transformational, is to actually say, this isn't the same thing. This isn't just, oh, I'm always so anxious. I worked through that layer. If it comes back, this is a new layer. I was successful at resolving and processing the old one. Now it's the next one. Because if you keep telling yourself every time, like, oh, that didn't work, that I'm back at the same place, A, that's not true, and B, it's really demotivating, unmotivating, whatever, however you say it. It's not motivating. Because that's the case, you if your brain goes there, it's like, hold on, wait a second. I'm going to look at it for what it really is. This is a new layer, which means that this new layer deserves the same amount of attention and love for me that the last layer did, which means that I start at step one and acknowledge, what's the deal here? You may find that it's a little bit of a different flavor, in which case that's going to be really, really like enlightening, right? You're going to understand all of a sudden, oh, for this situation, there's all these layers and these nuances here that I was just lumping together. But really, look at this. Now I know more about myself. And Megan and I talk about our framework, education. When you understand yourself, you feel empowered. And when you feel empowered, you can go and enjoy your life, right? Those are the steps. And when we do this kind of work, that is the gold that we get. That's our payment for doing this work, because then we get to step into our empowerment and show up for our enjoyment. And isn't that the whole point of healing on any level? All right, I am sending you lots of love. Come join us for the challenge. Bring a friend, and we can't wait to see you there. Mwah.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare. And we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads. And we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting edge information.
If you found these pod classes helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.